listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans, and welcome to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and opinions. I'm John KickedTripod Horstman, and here's your Overwatch League Daily episode for December 7th, 2017. On today's show, the first day of the Overwatch League preseason at Blizzard Arena in Burbank, California is in the books. Find out who won, who lost, and what to take away from the first day of games. I'm also joined by Pesto Enthusiast and Seamus Seamoose Anderson to analyze the matches from yesterday evening. But first, let's go to the scoreboard. In the first match, it was the Florida Mayhem against the San Francisco Shock, who were filling in for the absent Philadelphia Fusion. While the expectations were high for the Mayhem going into the beginning of the preseason, the San Francisco Shock were able to capitalize on poor support positioning and ult management and took a close 3-1 victory over the Mayhem. After their first match, the Shock turned around to take on the LA Valiant. Again, the LA Valiant came in favored for this match, but barely eked out a 3-2 victory against a San Francisco Shock roster with a lot to prove. Lastly, the two APAC franchises went head-to-head as the Seoul Dynasty took on the Shanghai Dragons. We previewed this match in Episode 5 with Overwatch Pacific Championship casters Avril and Pixie. To nobody's surprise, the Seoul Dynasty took the series 4-0. However, Shanghai did impress on offense on Temple of Anubis and Dorado. To take a deeper look at these matches and their impact, I'm joined by Overwatch analyst and founder of JunkertownJournal.com, Pesto Enthusiast, and Overwatch caster and analyst, Seamoose. First, let's discuss the Mayhem versus the Shock. The Shock surprised many as they defeated Florida 3-1. What were the mismatches that allowed for the Shock to earn the win? Pesto Enthusiast, you're up first.
The biggest mismatch in the game was at DPS. Divik and Logic cycled through a fair number of heroes, and they weren't getting traction on any of them. Divik's Genji, which is a hero we know he can run well, looked especially lackluster today. Meanwhile, BabyBay's Widowmaker was incredibly effective, and he wasn't getting put under nearly enough pressure. For a position that we were concerned about, both of his DPS partners did a solid job, and with BabyBay going off the way he did, they didn't need to do anything more than that.
Let's talk about your overall impressions. For the players, were there any players that really stood out as impressive to you?
Most impressive people from the Shock were BabyBay, we have to highlight for sure. He showed flexibility as well as ability to just control on the Widowmaker. For context, I am a massive fanboy. I've worked with this guy in 2 professional organizations, but I've worked with him and I hold him this high regard because I think he's absolutely fantastic. Sleepy was ridiculously impressive, made very few mistakes, was showing up in the kill feed again and again. He's got flexibility, he has carry potential unlike many other flex supports in his position. I mean, that was definitely one of the standouts. Dante underperformed a little bit, which was a little bit disappointing for me personally. I've seen him before and I feel like he definitely could show up better. IDDQD showed off on Tracer, which is probably a little bit surprising to a lot of folks, but it's something that he has run for quite a while in scrims and privately. I don't actually think that was his best performance. I think he can still be better. But that's one of the things about Shock that impressed me, was that I don't actually think that the level of gameplay was incredibly high out of either of the opponents they had today, but they were still able to get the W's, and they also showed some impressive moments. For example, the play on Eichenwald, where the Widowmaker was forcing the defending team to run into, like, behind the cover, and then you saw the Nevix bomb. Oh, speaking of Nevix was insanely impressive. Nevix and Nomi also did really well. Like, that kind of role is kind of, alright, what exactly went wrong? Like, how many mistakes you see, and Nomi barely made any major mistakes, and Nevix was also really impressive.
For Shock, the players that impressed the most were BabyBay and Sleepy, and I don't think me saying that is going to be a surprise to anyone who watched the games. Going into the game, we knew that BabyBay was a pretty good Soldier 76 from his time on Kungarna, but I doubt many people were expecting to put on a clinic on Widowmaker. Sleepy came in even less well known, although if you never heard of him, shame on you, because Around the Watch did a great interview with him a few weeks back. His Zenyatta was absolutely sublime, and even though he was getting picks left and right, he really wasn't dying all that much. For Mayhem, the standout player was Maniton. In a day that most of the team is going to be eager to forget, Maniton had a couple of clutch diva bombs and some great individual plays that let the team be competitive even when they looked like they shouldn't have been.
So what should we be taking away from the Mayhem performance from yesterday?
Yeah, it's interesting because the question of where does Mayhem go from here is a big one. I was talking to a couple of people, and it's entirely possible the Mayhem were intentionally running some weird stuff, just because it's preseason and they don't want to show their entire hand. And that's kind of the risk you have when you have 6 players. If they were to show off their entire hand early, then they might run into trouble. And the last game that they had, like it seemed as if they were kind of playing with more intent on the compositions, but that's still hard to judge, and I don't want to write off the win as sandbagging on their part. Shock certainly looked decent. I will still say that this was a game between two teams that, yes, it's Overwatch League, it's very hype, these are the best players in the world, but it was actually kind of low level overall. With that in mind, Shock definitely seemed like they have a skill ceiling that could improve even more. I think that fans from the REN of the team will actually be pleasantly surprised with their results, whereas fans of the Mayhem, yeah, they really need to work on it. Like, either they sandbagged, either intentionally or not, or some of the problems of communication are coming up, which were unexpected, or Logic is consistently having problems performing on LAN, which is not unexpected, to be honest. And we'll see whether or not the Mayhem can recover from that.
So let's talk a little bit about the second match. What was the big storyline for you with this match?
Coming into the second match of a doubleheader, the storyline for Shock was, did they beat Mayhem because they're the real deal, or because Mayhem was underperforming? I would say that the answer is a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Up against Fate and Envy, my concern about Shock's tank line from the Mayhem game only grew. Soon was also a step above either of Shock's current options on Tracer, and it's a bit concerning considering how much carry potential she has. However, Shock still looked stronger than I had expected before today's games, and Baby Bay and Sleepy were still standouts for the team. For Valiant, the storyline was, are the dark days finally over? In Contender Season 1, when the team was still Immortals, they looked bad. And since then, they picked up Soon and Unko and Silk Thread and Numlocked. And speaking of Numlocked, where was he tonight? But with their win over Shock, the answer is absolutely yes. The dark days are over. Fate, Envy, and Soon were strong, and they did a lot to challenge the terror that is Baby Bay. So I see this as a team with a lot of potential, and they're going to have even more potential once Agilities is able to play at the start of the regular season.
Many were expecting the Valiant to win this, but they were also expecting it to be a bit more decisive. Does this performance from the Valiant affect how you rank them at all?
The way I see it, London, Seoul, Dallas, and New York are all locked to the top 4, and everyone else is fighting for 5th and 6th and the last 2 playoff spots. Going into the preseason, I thought of both Valiant and Shock as decent teams, capable of contesting for those last 2 playoff spots, but I actually placed Houston and Florida in them. Certainly Mayhem is on shakier ground after the night's first match, and I've heard some things about Houston that have me questioning how highly I placed them, but I'm not going to rush into reordering my list without seeing everyone else play. Ultimately, I wouldn't be surprised if one of these teams snuck into the playoffs, but there was nothing in tonight's brawl that was so dominant that I'm willing to give them the 5th or the 6th spot tonight.
Personally, to me, the Valiant seems a middle-of-the-pack team. I think they have a lot of potential, but I'm uncertain if that'll actually be realized. If it is realized, they could maybe be a top 4 contender. I'm not sure. I don't think, and to me, Shock is probably like bottom 4, but at the top of bottom 4, like many other people. I don't think my perception or my expectations or my PR has changed too much based off their performance today. I was actually quite surprised at the composition they ran. It seems like there's a high degree of variability in terms of their performance, with the fact that they allowed the native Korean speakers. They didn't have a real dedicated shot caller who was native. So I definitely think if we were to see this roster of 6 more often, they will improve in the future. So I would still expect the Valiant to be a middle-of-the-pack team. Now, they did win against the Shock, but I do think that a lot of people will credit the Shock for running out of endurance, and perhaps had the Shock played them fresh, they would have won. But this honestly doesn't change my expectations too much. If we continue to see the roster we did today, and they struggle to have a good communication, be very communicative, then they'll have troubles. If they integrate some of the other callers and they lose strength, they'll have trouble. For example, we didn't see Verbo today because he's not as good as some of the other heroes. He's very good at Lucio, and obviously is quite a strong caller. But obviously, when you have Unko and Kariv, who are these fantastic flex supports, why wouldn't you put them more on heroes that are suited to their style? Now, with that in mind, if those two play together and they play more Valiant games together, and the lack of calling is an issue, then Valiant will struggle. If the lack of calling is an issue and Verbo can only still play Lucio, then they'll struggle. But I don't think this changes too much, just because it is still preseason, and Valiant are definitely a team with a lot of different balls to juggle, so to speak, and how exactly that's coordinated can either have a really positive effect or a negative effect. So it might be a bit of a cop-out. I still think they have high potential, but they're probably going to be a middle-of-the-road team, and Shock will be a low-middle team. But it's possible that this starts giving the confidence to the Shock players that even a team like Valiant, which most people expected to win, they can compete with now, and imagine how good they are in the future. So we'll see.
So let's move on to the Dynasty versus the Dragons. Expectations were fairly low for the Shanghai Dragons in this specific match. They're a team of players with very few results, let alone top results. So from the beginning, it was pretty obvious that Seoul was going to simply outplay Shanghai. Did Shanghai play poorly, or is Seoul really just that good?
It's really tough to judge Shanghai considering who they're up against. Seoul is very, very, very good. And that's not a surprise, as they went out and got the most talented players they could find to plug holes in what was already one of the strongest rosters in the world. If anything, Seoul is a stronger team than what we saw tonight. I think that both they and Shanghai were hurt by being forced to make substitutions that they probably wouldn't have made during the regular season. Shanghai actually did a better job than I expected, considering that they have had virtually no time to practice in Burbank, and apparently some of their players have only been in the States for less than 24 hours. I'd be excited to see what this team looks like once they've actually had time to build synergy and sleep off the jet lag.
Did any Shanghai players stand out and really impress you with how they played?
For Shanghai, the standout player was definitely Dia. After watching BabyBay run riot on Widowmaker for 2 games straight, Dia stepped up and put on just as strong a performance on the hero against a much stronger team than either of the ones that Shock faced. I actually love to see Dia and BabyBay in a Widowmaker duel. I think that'd be really special.
What about for Seoul?
For Seoul, the player that I want to highlight is Bunny. Everyone already knows that the Lunatic High veterans like Ryu Jaehong are nutty, but Bunny is a new addition. He's really slotted in nicely, and I think he did a ton of work. It's going to be really fun to see him go up against the already established titans of Tracer play, like Effect and Saebyeolbi.
What are you hoping to see from Shanghai for the rest of the preseason?
I want to see Shanghai play against a team that's close to their skill level, for one. It's hard judging teams when they're making a ton of substitutions purely because they have to. Add in the travel fatigue and the skill gap between them and Seoul, and it's really tough to draw any conclusions from tonight's match. I think that, as I said before, that the matchup with Shock, so we get to see that Widowmaker duel, would be great, but really anyone outside of the top 4 would be better at seeing what Shanghai is really going to offer for the rest of the year.
So that's going to do it for episode 7. My thanks to Pesto Enthusiast and Seamoose for joining me today. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at Pesto Enthusiast and at Seamoose. Episode 8 will be back tomorrow, December 8th, where I'll be joined again by Seamoose and Overwatch caster and analyst Hirix. Remember, you can find this show on any of your favorite podcast outlets, including iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Podcasts. We're on YouTube too. Click on the link in the show notes to find us. Want to stay in touch? Email me at overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com, tweet me at OWLDailyShow, or join our Discord at discord.me/OWLDailyShow. That's going to do it for episode 7. We'll see you tomorrow.